Ladies and gentlemen, the show we've all been waiting for, Paranormal Buzz Radio is proud to present REP Paranormal and Friends with your hosts, Kim Purvis and Allison Robinson. Live every Thursday night on Spreaker, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 Central, 5 Pacific. Be sure to check out their Facebook page, REP Paranormal Busters.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of Paranormal Buzz Radio or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is strictly prohibited. For information on everything Paranormal Buzz Radio has to offer, visit our website, paranormalbuzzradio.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey everybody, welcome to another night of REP Paranormal and Friends. We have a special guest tonight. We have Ron Yacovetti on tonight, so welcome.
Hey, how are you? Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yes, absolutely.
This is very cool.
I'm doing fan-freaking-tastic. Like I was saying,
Well,
I get to go back to work starting next week.
That is awesome. Yeah, the more normality we start to see, the better I think it'll be for a lot of people. But
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think so too. It's yeah. I've been waiting for it. I went into the office today just to make sure that the equipment was still running good, so that way we can see patients. So.
Wow.
All right. Oh, let's see here. Hey, everybody in chat, just giving a quick shout out here. We have Matt, Darren, and we have Intuitive April in there, so welcome.
Intuitive April, one of the best people, best psychic mediums that I have ever come across. She's an awesome human being. And she's really talented.
Yes, I have seen her on Instagram. So,
yeah. She is, I think, a stockholder in Instagram, if I'm not mistaken. No, I'm kidding.
All right.
It's her backyard.
So, for those listeners that are not familiar with you, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself?
Absolutely. So my paranormal endeavors started. I used to live. I'm in New Jersey now, which is where I'm from. I lived in Los Angeles for 14 years, and I started doing ghost hunting, public events, and everything. And along the way, to be more pointed, I became fascinated with the spirit box stuff. I had seen Chad Lindbergh, who's been from Fast and Furious. He's been on a couple of paranormal things, using a spirit box SB7 at the Glen Tavern Inn in Santa Paula, California. And directly responding to him were voices. They were clear. And I was like, what is that thing he's holding, and where do I get one? And so I became initially just a paranormal investigator, but then like many people who do this, you find a niche or a passion. You find something that really ignites you to want to learn and dive in. And so for me, it became the audio stuff. It became EVP to a large extent, but then mostly what's called ITC, which is Instrumental Trance Communication, which is a newer category, so to speak, comparatively. Everything was EVP that came in vocally in the beginning, and then in 1989, a German physicist named Dr. Ernst Sinkowski coined the term ITC, Instrumental Trance Communication, because the difference was like a recorder or recording device will capture a voice of the air for EVP, but in ITC, the electronic device is what's facilitating it. It's in fact the functional medium, so it's not just capturing it, it's helping facilitate it.
Hang on a second. Trying to fix my headphones here. I'm having a hard time hearing a little bit. Is everybody hearing us okay? Anybody? delay in chat, but all right. We do have didn't we have a quick question?
Yes.
Sure.
All right. I'll get this one real quick because I saw this come
They're
through.
hearing us.
Okay, good. They're hearing us.
Good.
I was just having a hard time hearing. We had Darren ask a quick question. Do you build your own devices?
That is an excellent question, and the funny part about it is a lot of the people who are ITC personnel in the field, people like from New Jersey, Stephen Holte, Jay Prather, K.D. Stafford, Bob Christopher from Ghost Detectives. They build boxes and devices. I don't build them. I'm learning some of the mechanics of it, but I'm more fascinated with, and I dove more into the history behind it and how it works as far as the communication side of it too. Much like you would see a race car driver, for example, who knows how to drive, he knows how to use the equipment, he uses it on the highest level possible, but he doesn't build the car.
Right.
So I'm interested in that, and I'm fascinated with it, but my natural abilities, I guess, hadn't gravitated, at least yet, towards building them, and I don't have insurance for major fires and explosions, so I'm not trying to go that direction yet. But no, yeah, so I mean, those people I named are brilliant. They make really, really amazing pieces of equipment. The other thing is that the lane within ITC that I've found myself in over the last year or so now is rooted in European methodology, which is called direct radio voice, or DRV. Now, a lot of that was born out of EVP when they would use white noise on radios just as audio support to help facilitate the vibration of voice to capture EVP. And then a lot of the voices told the earlier European communicators to use a radio to actually communicate, and in some instances they just started coming through the radio itself. That's direct radio voice. So in an instance like that, to do this kind of research, I don't need to build. All I need to do is have a world band radio, which I have a few of, that have, of course, it has FM and standard AM, but it has long wave, short wave, medium wave. I'm now experimenting a little bit with SDR, which is software-driven radio, which has all of those, plus VLF, which is very low frequency, which is huge waves of audio waves. Used, I think, at one point for emergency services, primarily used for submarines communication because of the size of the wave being able to permeate and propagate through the water. So for me, it was just I read the basics of this stuff when I was fascinated with it. You get a radio, you tune it between stations. One of the most amazing ITC researchers ever was an Italian gentleman named Marcello Bacci. He had a facility or a studio space, so to speak, in Grosseto, Italy. Mm-hmm. People would come weekly, I think, or monthly, and he would do sittings, didn't know any of the people there, and their lost loved ones would come through the radio.
Oh, wow.
He was using a vacuum tube radio, and he would sometimes toggle between positions, but he would not stay on a station with radio emissions. So that stuff fascinated me, and when I saw the level of and the quality of evidence and audio that these people were capturing, it totally piqued my interest, and I started diving into doing it. They have a different standard under European ITC methodologies. It's like a lot of the European researchers don't like the sweeping ghost boxes that you see here, primarily popularized through TV. They don't like those devices because they feel like the phenomena or the possibility of pareidolia, where you hear things or put pieces of puzzles together that your ears and brains are finishing, that you're more prone to that when you have human phenomes that are part of the process, even if it's being cycled randomly through. Now, I've used both. I love all of the boxes, but I understand where they're coming from. You have to look at their platform. These are people who have raised funding for ITC research. They've been at symposiums with other physicists and biologists and parapsychologists and psychiatrists and all the different people with different high-level degrees trying to create a wide-based acceptance of the field. So for them, when you're functioning on that level and not just casual ghost hunting, right, the last thing they want is to leave something in the equation that helps fester doubt. And so for them, when you have human voice in there, it's not good. And then you could mistake things that you're hearing. Whereas if you're just listening to static and then your voices come through the radio and respond to you between radio emissions, and I'm using long wave radio, which there are maybe 2 broadcast stations you can actually get in the States that are on long wave.
I agree. Okay, so what are your thoughts on, like, the Ovilus?
I have an Ovilus. I like the device. Here's the thing: this is where I geek out. I love all the toys. I could be homeless on a corner, surrounded by ghost hunting equipment, and probably have somewhat of a smile. But those kind of devices, the only concern or thing is you have to be discerning when you use them. It's one thing when you do like EVP or something, you ask questions, you listen to the playback, there's no voice there, right? But those devices and even the apps that facilitate like word banks generations like that,
right?
They give you words based on environmental conditions or how they're influenced, regardless. Sometimes they're quiet and they don't do stuff, but a lot of times they will give you words. And so you really need to buckle down and look at timing and context and relevance when you're doing that to make sure that if something comes through, it's not just random, that it actually is a direct communication perhaps. So I've seen them work. I've seen them,
Do you think that sometimes when people get words on there, that they just kind of put things together, like,
oh my God, yeah,
speculate?
So, yeah, I was with a group in California when I started, and the big joke with the Ovilus, and they hated it. It was a group, it was mostly women, a couple of us guys, and they hated the Ovilus because they called it the Africa factor. Because you'd be at an event, you're in a location, and the word Africa comes up on the screen. And all of a sudden, people who are operating the device or doing the session forget that you're the interviewer, not the interviewee, and then they start going, Africa? What happened in Africa? Did you die in Africa? Were we there in Africa? Are you there now? Is that where you're buried? And all of a sudden they let that dictate where the conversation goes. So I think it's a slippery slope. You have to really be discerning if you use it and not just take everything that comes out of it as gospel.
Right. That's kind of my logic on it too. Like, I'm not going to see a word come up and then something else and then try to put it together like, oh my gosh, this is it.
And don't hang on to it.
Yeah,
the more you hang on to it, the more stuff comes out of it that doesn't mean nothing.
I've noticed that. I don't know how you do it, but we like to set ours down somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, there's a certain some equipment, like K2s. If you shake it and stuff, you get a false positive. So I believe that there's a certain. It's being careful, and you really just have to be discerning about it. You might get something that's relevant, and you may not have the context for it now. Right. And maybe you talk to the historian a week later, and it turns out that name actually has relevance to the history.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I agree with that too. What did we get?
We were talking about, it came up religion something.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But I can't remember what we were talking about to bring.
But I think I said something because I was listening to the Spirit Box, the Estes method. And I think I said something about that, and then shortly after it came up on the Ovilus.
Yeah. No, the Estes method is great too. We played around with it a little bit. A friend of ours, Haiti Pressel, she's done a lot of experimentation doing the Estes method. It's one of the things that comes from the earlier days of paranormal research that, thank goodness, people like her and people like you are still carrying it forward, because it is an interesting methodology to use when the person who's spitting out the words that they hear with some level of clarity is not privy to the question, so that connecting, you're listening. And that's another thing that comes with Spirit Box stuff too. That's another criticism that goes, well, you're hearing what you want to hear. That's why you're hearing what, you think you're getting answers. But what nobody explains on the skeptical side of that is they don't explain what I call the gaps. When you use a device, if you ask questions, I always know what I want to hear. I always know what the answers should be or would be. So how do you explain the 99 misses when I get nothing and the one hit that I get when it answers my question?
Yeah. Yep.
So you have to be skeptical, you have to be open, and you have to understand that we don't know everything. That's why we're doing what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain level of there's a certain, almost like a church and state separation that I think that's almost an accepted, and I hate to see this in the field, that science is the antithesis. It's the opposite of where the paranormal researcher is. And that's not true. A lot of the leading people for ITC, direct radio stuff, EVP, physicists, engineers, electrical engineers, like the brilliant people who are very much in science. I think it's something I found fascinating, something to kind of be aware of, is that the reason that people have this conception of science and the spiritual mystical stuff being two separate opposing things. This goes back now, but back in history, I think it was 1545, I think, to 63. So 1563 was called the Council of Trent. And it was an ecumenical event, it was a lot of Catholic churches banding together. There was a Protestant Reformation, and so this was a counter-Reformation movement. And so a lot of the Catholic churches kind of banded together, and when they were kind of just laying claim to what's what and who, what's under whose umbrella, so to speak, spiritual matters and stuff of that level was under the church. Anything of the physical world, materialist stuff, was given to science. And so from that point forward, these two fields were kind of mutually exclusive, but not. It really should not be that way. But that's where that mentality comes from. It goes back that far. So I think there's certain things we need to shed and kind of grow out of too, you know what I mean, with regard to that.
I agree.
And also the idea that science says that anything that is psychical research or paranormal research can't be legit and valid unless it can be measured and quantified and repeated over and over and over again in a lab. But it's only a standard that's really held to something like paranormal research for the most part, right? How's that working out for astronomy? Astronomy is a field work, just like paranormal research. Are they bringing planets and stars and celestial bodies into a lab? No, but it's accepted. Engineering, psychology, sociology, anthropology, all heavily involved field work.
Right.
So again, another mentality I think we need to shed to move the field forward. It is not a lack of scientific validity just because you can't recreate it in a lab over and over and over again.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. That is really actually a good point. I never thought of it that way, but once you look at it that way.
And some of the locations too, if there's a given spirit that's supposed to be there, or if there's certain conductors, water, or minerals or things in the wood, whatever that help facilitate communication, then that is the lab. Then that location is the lab, and maybe you get communication with a spirit there or whatever it is you're talking to, and then you bring those devices back to the lab. You don't have the same elements that are part of the puzzle anymore.
Yep, that is, that's a good point also. Really it is. I never thought, like I said, I never thought of it that way. When you have all those conductors there, yeah, it would be kind of like a lab.
That's for that given place, that's the lab. When somebody does, like to go to astronomy, that's you got to work with what you have. You have to play the hand you're dealt in that situation. You can't bring everything in a nice little box into a laboratory and then recreate it.
Yep. That is 100% true. We have one in chat says, "Do you ever run out of facts?"
That's probably a very good friend of ours named Giuseppe.
Yep. Giuseppe? Yeah. Yep. I wasn't sure how to pronounce the name, so sorry.
Yeah, no. He's an awesome human being. I'll never admit that anywhere.
You just did.
Yeah. I know. Well, let him figure it out.
Okay.
Yeah, there's so many people. Being a part of this community is something that I'm proud of more than anything I do within it. The people who do what we do, John Ruggiero and Chris Theron from New Jersey Paranormal, Anthony and Gerard Seminelli from Seekers Club in New York, Kelly and Kim who run the Shanley Hotel in New York. A place I want to go and I want to visit, Tony and Sharia Rathman. They have Copper Canyon Paranormal Research Center. It used to be the old Phelps Dodge Hospital. Pam and Steve Barry, who run the Gettysburg Ghost Exchange and the Lookout House out in Gettysburg, of course. I know you guys just had Sean Austin on not that long ago. I got to work with him a couple times. Awesome guy, knows what he's doing, fun to work with. Those are the criteria for me. You know, have some idea of what you're doing and be able to enjoy it.
Yep.
So that's I spend time anytime I'm on any show, kind of putting it out there to some of the people that I love and respect in the field, because that's what they're part of what makes this. You know, Heidi and Cassandra do the Adventures of Heidi and Cassandra. Gary Greener, Chris Mendez. I love being included with these people. Paul Dixon, Tina Williamson. So I'm not going to name drop people on TV. I'm going to name drop people that I love.
There you go.
Nothing wrong with that.
That's fine. 100%. Yeah, when we had Sean on, that was awesome. He was a really awesome guy.
Yeah, he's really cool. He's fun to work with too, and he taught us a couple things we hadn't seen. Hopefully, I think we showed him with the direct radio voice stuff that we're talking about. Showed him a couple things that maybe he hadn't seen being done. The direct radio stuff that we do it's a grind. My girlfriend Lourdes Gonzalez and I will do sessions. Usually once a week by appointment. They say to do it. Obviously now we have a little time on our hands, so we've been doing it a little bit more than once a week, but we've been doing a lot of sessions and recording and logging, and Lourdes is detail oriented. She's logging the moon cycle, the barometric pressure, all the different details, just so at some point we can start maybe just, determining if there's any kind of patterns, when this and this happen, you're getting more stuff. The frequencies that we're using, again, we're using a long wave radio frequency for the most part to do this. We've experimented with, and it's just on a static station. Sometimes we can toggle a little bit, but it's not sweeping through frequency, so there's no radio emissions. So when we get a response, it is the next purest form of communication to EVP. And then we're trying all different things. We've tried in radio. There's a thing called single sideband, upper or lower sideband. A radio wave has a carrier wave, which is what takes it and propagates it forward from transmission to reception. And then there's an upper and lower sideband. Both bands within that wave have the entire message, whatever the data is, coded in it. So if you cut one of them off, what you do is it's like putting your finger on a garden hose. You're making the stream stronger and more efficient to go further. So we've messed around with sideband just to see if it did anything. One of the things that I always wondered when we started doing any kind of spirit box stuff is we're not communicating with a microphone, right? When you go to a haunted location and you do a session, you're not communicating outwards, broadcasting with a microphone. So when you get a response, as fascinating as it is, but how many people sit back and look and go, how are they even hearing us? They're not in the material world that we're in, even if it's overlapping, if it's alternate planes or, it's a dimensional thing and it's an astral level. How are they hearing us? So I'm looking at aspects of how the things work. Is the carrier wave that AM and FM signals ride on, is that taking our voice to and from whoever we're speaking to? We're getting responses. People go, you do a session, how do you know it's not a ham radio operator or a truck, using a CB? Well, first of all, I'm on long wave, and they're not on those frequencies for one. Second of all, how is the guy in the truck with one hand on a cheeseburger, the other hand between his legs, how is he hearing me?
Right.
So somebody's hearing me, and so one of the things I'm trying to figure out is it the electromagnetic waves that are in the air with all the stuff that's going on in the world with cell towers, and is it the carrier wave that radio frequencies use? One of the reasons that a lot of direct radio researchers use AM is because of the AM waves are more susceptible to interference. They're larger waves, where the FM ones are tighter. Almost like a cardiogram, you see like a heart rate when it's up and down. FM waves are tighter, so you have stronger sound fidelity, but at the same time, less space for interruption. So they're not as conducive to doing direct radio sessions as AM would be, especially the longer wave frequencies, the lower bands.
Excuse me, that took my throat. Excuse me. 'Tis the season for the allergies.
Yeah. Indeed it is. We messed around with something called heterodyning, which is when you take two signals and you channel them into one cable or one line, so to speak. So you have two different signals, and you're taking the properties of both, emerging it and creating an IF, which is an intermittent frequency.
Uh-huh.
So we've done that with ultra high frequency and long wave, and mixed it into, and it's called heterodyning, and trying to see if the mixing of the frequencies will facilitate better or worse communication, if it does anything. So yeah, I've taken a deep dive into just radio stuff too, to understand the mechanics of how what we're trying to do even works. But I don't build them.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying something, then I thought it cut
Oh,
off.
no.
Okay.
I talk a lot. I'm half babbler on my mother's side.
That's okay. We have a quick question that kind of goes with this. So Darren would like to know, let's see, it says, how different do you treat your spirit box sessions inside a location and going outside with it?
So it's interesting. So when I go to a location and do like a paranormal investigation, a ghost hunt, I try to do the same thing you do in any session. You want to have as much control of the environment as you can. You want to rule out any false positives. You do EVP, the whole no whispering thing or whatever. I try to listen with a discerning ear. I try to give time for answers to come through. Always record. I have claimed the Bonehead of the Year trophy, as many people in the field probably have, by turning something on while I'm putting batteries on my other stuff, and then something comes through, and I'm like, I'm an idiot, because I would have been great to capture, but no. So a lot of us have done that. So I've learned my lesson on that. But, I mean, to try to make the session as vetted as possible. You want to try to vet your evidence, or what you get and perceive as evidence, as best you can. The difference with the direct radio sessions we do at home is that this comes from the European methodologies. There's a belief that the next level or plane that we're communicating with, that they have stations or ports of call where they're using some form of technology. It's the astral level, so they have some kind of a finer physical form, not corporeal like we are, but a level up. And so they have stations of communication, supposedly. This is from the European mindset. And so that's why we do it like as an appointment every Thursday, 8 or 9 or whatever. We sit down, we turn the radio on, we let it build what's called a connection bridge. They believe, and this is something that paranormal investigators believe, in what there's a biologist named Rupert Sheldrake. He calls it morphogenic fields, which is basically the combined energies of everybody involved, right? They say you're not in a good place, mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever. You should not go to the investigation or be there. It's kind of along those lines, that the energies collectively are what you're putting into the session. So that's part of what's going to fuel or help facilitate if you get communications. And I think in quantum mechanics, it's considered to be something like on a subatomic level, and they call it the observer effect. But it's that same, your comprehension and ability to partake is in some way rooted in your openness and your intent. So I try to go back to the original question, I try to secure the quality of any recording session as best I can, not to move around, not to shuffle feet, tag things if you make a noise that you could misinterpret as a voice. But it is definitely a different game. It is more of a grind. It is not the instant gratification that you get with a ghost box out in the field when you're sitting in front of a radio listening to static for 20, 30 minutes, and you feel like somebody who got a radio with Sirius XM but didn't pay for the subscription.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, where'd it go?
Okay, we had a couple more questions.
On the same
Awesome.
subject.
Kind of on the same subject here.
No, that's awesome. I appreciate anybody asking questions and just being here listening.
Oh, yeah,
to
there's usually quite a few, so.
That's great.
All right. They want to know, can the same be applied to empty static TV channels?
Yes. So actually, that brings up another thing. So yes, a couple of the things that we played around with here, both when we did heterodyning, which is mixing the frequencies, and then just in and of itself, some of the old analog TVs, I have a few, where you have audio for radio, but it also has the analog TV signals with the antenna. So the TV audio is actually I think it is AM frequency. Then it also has ultra high and very high frequency. Remember those channels from the old TVs like UHF and VHF?
Yep.
So ultra high frequencies are smaller, higher energy waves. They're primarily better between gaps for range. So if the signal has to traverse somewhere where it's got to go through gaps of, structures or whatever, UHF is better. Very high frequency VHF is wider waves, and so those larger waves are better to pass over, obstacles versus trying to weave in between things, so to speak. All radio waves, AM, FM, all of them, are a form of light. So all radio waves travel at the same speed. That's an important thing to know too. So when you're doing, especially like direct radio stuff, when we're working with long wave, you're talking about radio frequencies that are bouncing off the charged particles in the ionosphere. And so having the lower bands is for us at least has been a little bit more rewarding, where that there's no radio emissions. And when you get something that sounds like speech cadence and you can actually hear what it's saying, it is mind-blowing. But yes, you can use those TV signal frequencies. There's also visual ITC, which we've been doing a little bit of, and we've actually got some really odd images so far doing it. A German researcher named Klaus Schreiber came up with a method named after him, Schreiber method, and it's basically, then there's variations of this. It's a video loop. So you can take a camera with a monitor, have the video out from the camera going into the monitor, and the camera's filming the monitor it's feeding out to. So you're creating a video feedback loop. And you'll see it do that almost like picture and picture and picture and picture and picture, and it trails back off. And then it'll kind of just fluctuate a little bit. And people have seen landscapes. They've seen faces. It's the results. Again, European ITC, both visual and audible, is really in a lot of ways ahead of what happened in America. There's a few researchers in the States, Mark Macy, who's I think is out of Colorado, who have had tremendous success with doing both of those things. But yes, the signals, the audio, white noise signals from televisions are good for audio work. The video feedback loop to try to catch visual image is also a really, really cool thing to play around with that we've been messing with also.
Gosh, we were talking something similar to that. We had Penny Griffiths Morgan on last week. And I can't remember the guy's name, but after he passed, like around his funeral time,
Friedrich Jürgensen.
Yes, and that his
Friedrich Jürgensen
he comes
was
up
one
on
of
the
pioneers,
TV screen.
One of the pioneers of EVP. He was doing a documentary on birds.
Yes,
and he was out in the field recording, and he got voices. And at first, he thought it may be people nearby, but then he was able to have it happen again. So that's an interesting thing, too, to speak to both the phenomena and the skeptical side of it, right? He had inspired a Latvian psychologist named Konstantin Radeve, who's a huge, he's got like 70,000 plus recordings of different voices. And when Radeve started doing EVP stuff, he was in places where Latvian was not spoken. There was no radio bleed through or nothing coming out of anything where it was going to be speaking. It was using dialects that were native to a specific village where he was from. So, yes, Jurgensen, at the time of his funeral, a couple that he was friends with that lived 200 and something miles away, the lady just got an instinct to turn on her tube television, and at that time, it flashed like light and dark, whatever, and then a distortion version of his face, but very easy to liken to him, appeared on their television, and they happened to catch a Polaroid picture of it before it was gone.
Right. Yeah, it was very interesting to see that, because she posted it in her book, and when I read about that, I was just like, that is so insane.
Some of the things that European researchers have captured, I love. Again, I've been doing paranormal stuff for 8 or so years. I love ghost hunting. I love going to places and doing the investigations. But for the actual research, the grind of it side of it, since we've been doing for about a year now, the direct radio stuff and that ITC stuff, visual and audible, and it has completely captivated my attention. what it does and how inexplicable it can be to have this stuff happen. And again, like I said, my mind gravitates to how is this even working, right? When you're talking into thin air without broadcasting, how is your voice traveling somewhere and back, right? And it's in a traditional radio setting, it's a simplex system. It's a transmitter sending a signal, receiver gets it, modulated, you hear it. Because radio is happening around all of our heads right now. We don't hear it. The signal has to get modulated down by the receiver, and then we get it. But in other ways of communicating, like there's what's considered a duplex or a half duplex system. A half duplex system would be like how walkie-talkies work, where the same channel or the same pipeline, so to speak, can carry a signal both ways, but one at a time. A full duplex would be like a phone, where both parties and signals can go both ways at the same time. So I'm looking at ways, and that's why we've experimented with different ways of doing our sessions to try to see if one of those possible methodologies is what's at play. One of the most amazing researchers from Germany, a gentleman named Hans Otto Koenig, who built insane equipment to do this stuff. He would liken it to what he called, what was the term that he used for it? He likened it to being in a car on a highway at a high speed and trying to open the window and shake hands with somebody in another car and then hold it. And that's why the communications a lot of times will last for a little bit, but then it breaks down. You can't just sustain it like picking up a phone, because you're talking about connecting with something on a vibrational level, even if it's just one up, but something that's got to be transduced down to where we are. So trying to align two different frequencies or interferences to fuse to have communication when you don't have control over the other one is a whole other conundrum. And so a lot of Hans Otto Koenig's work was based on trying to traverse that landscape and figure out how to make that work. And his results were amazing. Marcello Bacci, Dr. Annabella Cardoso from Portugal originally, amazing. The harsh fishbacks in Luxembourg. The results these people achieved was unlike anything you'll see on any ghost show on TV here.
100%. Giuseppe says, I'm so glad his interest turned to genetics. With his passion, we'd all be mutants by now. I just had to share. That's so funny. They're all being pretty active right now in chat. So I'm going to go through here and try to get some of these questions gone through here.
Absolutely. And I just started doing some stuff, too, with a guy named Keith Clark out of Florida who's with iDigital Media. He's got a YouTube channel called Metascience Foundation. Oh, and awesome. He kind of turned me on to the SDR, which is a software-driven radio. So I've been messing around with that. So I'm patched into an antenna, a loop antenna that's actually in Florida. And I can use long wave, short wave, medium wave. And then I've got filtration software that allows the stuff to come through, and it kind of cleans it up so that the vocal tracks might be a little bit more easy to pull out without, it's not enhancing anything, it's just cleaning it up. So from an archaeological mindset, it's dusting off the bones so you can see them. It's not putting them in the ground first.
Yep. Excuse me. All right. Let's see here. Darren has a question. When you're doing a spirit box session, who gets more of the activity? Do you think a man or a woman?
That, in my experience, and if you talk to other paranormal investigators, is really relative to the time, the place, the person. Speaking from, I think this is with the context they're asking about, like if you do a paranormal investigation, if you're with a group of people at a location, not like the sessions I'm doing here. In those instances, the best way to approach those is to be like, the goal is to get evidence. Sometimes when I've been to places like that, it's all about me. I get the answers. They're talking to me. Sometimes they could care less that I'm there. It's the lady next to me. It's the kid over here, whatever. So whoever's getting it gets it. we think in some instances, for whatever reason, whoever we're communicating with, whether it's an alternate plane, if it's the deceased, the spirit world, that sometimes it's a co-resonance. It's a like-mindedness, almost in the same way that if you and I met on the job and you were kind of into, collecting comic books, and then so was I, we would bond and maybe we become really good friends because we have that kind of, we both like the same types of, we both eat the same way, and we both like the same types of movies, whatever. We think it's a co-resonance. So you're at a certain, because everything's at a vibrational level, right? Everything in the universe is energy. Everything has a vibrational level. So the belief is that a lot of times when you connect, and even with the sessions we do, if we're getting responses, it could be something where you're co-vibrating. They're on a vibrational level where they relate to you, where they can tap into you. Has any of this been 100% proven? No.
No.
But it also has not been debunked, and that's also an important thing. I always love to explain this too. Skepticism and skeptics are great,
right?
But we cannot also accept the mentality that if you as an investigator have something you think is paranormal in nature, and you fail to meet the burden of proof, to prove beyond a doubt that it's paranormal, it does not mean that the person who is skeptical and doubts it wins.
Right.
It means that it has not been proven. But the onus is on either party, whatever side of the fence, whatever opinion you have. If you think it's all BS, you have just as much responsibility to prove that it's not as the person who believes that it is. But there's this whole default, like if you don't prove it's real, that the skeptic wins. No. Everybody has to prove it, and nobody's proven or disproven that this stuff is real. What is beyond debate is the fact that it happens. These things happen. Some of them are misinterpretations. Some of them are probably legit paranormal. Some of them you think they are and they're not. You can't be a skeptic or a believer of something that doesn't happen.
Yep. Let's see. Oh, Matt has a question.
Yes.
What books do you recommend for learning more about ITC?
Love that question. Love that question. Dr. Annabella Cardozo has 2 books. I'm trying to remember what the names are. They're both on what the electronic voices are telling us. I recommend hers highly. I have a lot of them actually right here. Konstantin Radove's got a book called Breakthrough. Two experimenters and scientists from a few years back, Rogo and Bayless, have a book called Phone Calls from the Dead. There's a whole phenomena of people who got actual phone calls, and they locked down the communications for the house where every phone call that would come in or go out of the house was being monitored and tracked, everything. And they had none recorded, but the researcher in the home still got voices, still got anomalous calls. They still documented some kind of an electronic voice phenomena or transcommunicated voice inside the home. So that is another one that's good. Hans Otto Koenig also has a book. I'm trying to remember the name of it. But I mean, if you remember the authors, you can find the book. David Fontana has "Is There an Afterlife?" which is a great book. Mark Macy has a book. Mark Macy's book is what is the name of the book? Miracles in the Storm. Okay, one of Annabella Cardozo's book, Dr. Annabella Cardozo, Electronic Contact with the Dead. What are the voices telling us? Early researcher, this is a fantastic book if you can find it. After We Die, What Then? By George Meek. Oh, Hans Otto Koenig book, there it is. It's called Listen, New Discoveries About the Afterlife. Those are all really, really good books. Ghosts of 29 Megacycles talks about the Spiricom, which was George Meek, Bill O'Neill. That was a whole electronic rig where they were using tone generators for the entire vocal range of the male voice and broadcasting it through the air. They had multiple oscillators involved, and so there's theories behind whether or not that was hoaxed or not. Bill O'Neill was a medium for sure. I recommend there's a documentary called Calling Earth on Vimeo, and there's one called Afterlife Investigations on, I think you watched it on YouTube, which is about the skull experiment. And there's another one, watch Marcello Bacci, the Italian ITC researcher. That's the other thing, too, about the European ITC and direct radio people. They have had trials by fire. What's the worst thing that happens to a ghost hunter here? Somebody on social media calls out and says, "Oh, I don't believe them. They're full of crap." These guys have been brought into labs and sessions. They've had their stuff locked down where you couldn't get radio coming into the building or the room. Alexander McRae worked on sound systems for the space program in Europe. He did sound systems for the subway stations. He's got devices with no microphones. He's still getting EVPs.
Oh, wow.
Marcello Bacci did regular sittings where people who lost their children, a lot of them were parents, would come, and the kids would come through. They would recognize the voices. So a group of researchers led by a scientist named Paolo Presi came in from an Italian group called Il Laboratorio. And Presi said to Bacci, "I'm going to take one of your 3 vacuum tubes out of the radio," which is part of what facilitates how the device works. If you're still getting voices, I'm going to take out 2. If you're still getting voices, I'm taking all 3 out. If you still get them then, I'm going to eat the vacuum tube. So they do the experiment. Presi takes out 1. They still get voices. 2 voices. 3 voices. They even shut the radio off, and they got voices. And then Bacci turned to Presi. He goes, No, don't eat. It's glass.
Oh, gosh.
They think that he had mediumistic capabilities. They think that he was part of what was going on. So if you go back to what I mentioned earlier, where the biologist Rupert Sheldrake calls it morphogenic fields, the combined energies of everybody. So that's part of what they think is, you don't have to be a medium necessarily, maybe, but they think in cases like that his energy and his presence was part of the mechanics, was part of the fuel that made the whole machine work. And again, science tested him. They tested him on a level that ghost hunters here with ghost boxes don't ever have to stand up to. That's why the European standards are held so much higher, because they've been down this road. And yes, science explains some of this stuff away. Science also supports a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of evidence for it. And that's an important thing to remember, too. Science is not an ideology. It's a method of inquiry. And so we're told that there's laws, but in a lot of cases, even those laws are conditional. They're at the time true. We're bound to time and space. But on the subatomic level, particles can be in 2 places at the same time. They can communicate from distances unknowingly from being completely apart. So there's things that time, space laws tell us can't happen that we've seen happen, or that they've documented happen in science. So,
cow. Chat's going nuts here right now.
Yeah.
Trying to keep up with all the questions here.
Go ahead. I'll be quiet.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I'm chatty.
That's okay. No worries. Okay, so what do you think about using
Giuseppe.
Tesla coils during the DRV session?
Well, now, thanks for bringing that up, whoever did, because my girlfriend, Lourdes Gonzalez, who does the sessions with me, is she the one that brought it up?
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, whoever brought that up, thanks, because she's got a fascination with Tesla. Tesla was one of the early geniuses who was fascinated with afterlife. He said at some point that he thought he had communicated with other worlds. Same thing with Edison, Alexander Graham Bell. There was a lot of fascination with speaking to the spirit world. And so she's been on this Tesla binge, and she's been wanting to get a Tesla coil and try to use some of those methods. And so that's one of the reasons why that she and I are a good match, and we're on the same page, because that is not conventional thinking. That is not, hey, let me buy a spirit box and call it a day. That's outside the box thinking, to try to put stuff together and do something different. So yeah, that's I'm sure, just because she said it, that's probably going to be in our budget in future at some point.
That'll be awesome to hear about that too.
Yeah, I don't think that it's an impossibility. I think that things like that. That's how you find some stuff too. Like, so you can see now too from where I started. Like when I was telling you, like I admire beyond belief the people who build devices. But why in this instance I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I just need to access it.
Right.
And so, and I'm looking at methodologies and ways that radio has been used, the mechanics of how radio works. Ghost hunting people do at night. People go, it's just done at night because it's more spooky. It's done at night because you have control of the environment. Can you get evidence during the day? Absolutely. But at night it's quieter, less foot traffic. Light is an energy. And so when we do radio sessions, for example, we're using long wave. Long wave radio frequencies are bouncing off of the ionosphere, which is a charged layer of particles at the bottom. It's like 90 to 100 something miles above the surface. And so since light is an energy, during the daytime, those particles are more scattered. So the radio waves that we're trying to use can bounce off of those, and they can fragment, they can scatter. Where at nighttime, where it's more calm, it would work more like, I guess, a satellite dish would work, where it'll bounce the wave back down, and it'll be less degradation in sound, because of the calmness of it versus if you did it at a time when things were more active.
Excuse me. April wants you to share some of your EVPs. Like, just give us some examples of what you caught.
EVPs are fascinating. So, all right, so I'm going to name drop again for you. There are some people, there's a woman named Tanya from New Jersey Paranormal who's phenomenal with EVP. Lourdes Gonzalez, who just chimed in about Nikola Tesla, is excellent at EVP. And then a friend of ours who lives in Gettysburg now is a gentleman named Flip Searles, who is, if you haven't had him on, I would recommend. He's hilarious for one. He's got the best ear for EVP. He's got ways that he's trained his ear to do that. He'll go to a crowded bar or place if he's hanging out somewhere, and he'll try to hone in on one conversation and cut everything else out so he can learn how to focus his hearing. So one good example, we went to the Gettysburg Ghost Exchange last year, and we were going to do investigating that night, but we went to the store during the day, so we're not lugging our gear around. It's in the hotel room. So Flip was working there part-time like that because he's friends with Pam and Steve Barry, again, awesome people. And he goes, you have your stuff? I was like, no. He goes, you didn't bring your recorders? I went, no. He goes, hold on. He goes to his car. He gets me one of his. He goes, go out back and do some EVPs by the little shed. Now, this is on the battlefield grounds, and there's nobody around for miles. I have yet to meet anybody who's got the skill to whisper from miles away and get it onto a recording device.
Right.
So Lourdes and I are back there with nobody for miles, and we start asking questions. The first question I asked was, if you were military, what's your rank? And there's a very clear and concise captain that came through when we did it. David Oman from Beverly Hills, the Oman House, has been on almost every Ghost show. Ghost Adventures, one of the highest episodes in ratings. He's a friend of mine from when I started out in L.A. I've got AVPs, audible voice phenomenons, and EVPs at his house that to this day, when I listen to them, I cannot believe. Like, they were like super clear. Definitely what you would consider Class A in quality. The classifications of those kind of things are important also. Class C can sometimes be stepped up in its legitimacy. You know, Class C is when you know it's a voice, you really don't know what it's saying, you're kind of taking guesses. B is when it's pretty clear, most agree, the variations in interpretation are close. Class A is undeniable, everybody hears it, everybody's in agreement, that's what it says. When I say everybody, I'm talking about people who are open-mindedly, really honestly trying to hear it. Right. I don't deal with the extremes, or I don't deal in the extremes, because I feel like if you have an agenda, if you believe everything's paranormal, you're off track. If you believe none of it's paranormal, I think you're off track. When you serve an agenda and not the truth, it's not. To me, it's not necessarily the way to do it. But to fool yourself, no, absolutely not. You have to have skepticism, for sure. So there's some people who interpret, they'll go, look, it's the Class A EVP. You play it, and it sounds like the teacher from Charlie Brown. You go,
Yeah.
How is that Class A? It's not.
Right.
That's not even Class D. So always review, always record. I'm trying to think of some of the other EVPs that we caught. We did a residential thing in Jersey one time with our friend Patrick and with Intuitive April, and one of our Sony recorders caught a really, really strong EVP at this house. And April had it online. It was on Instagram in a heartbeat. It had more likes than I've ever gotten on social media inside of 20 minutes.
Oh, wow.
It was a really good catch. That is another thing where you learn from people. Flip Cyril's amazing at doing EVP. And so if you do an investigation with him and you make noises, you move around, you whisper, he'll yell at you.
Mm-hmm.
Which is great. Lourdes tags everything. Everything. A fly farted. Somebody moved a toe.
Yep.
A cartilage cracked in an ear, and she's tagging it.
Yeah.
And I will make fun of her to the end of time for it because it's funny. But truth be told, when you review your evidence and you hear something and she didn't tag it, guess what?
Exactly.
Now you've got a higher level of validity to what your catch might be because everything got tagged and nobody said anything about that.
Right. I agree 100%. We try to do that too.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this is not. None of us are profiting from this. I don't believe. And I really, and that's why again I like the European side of a lot of the radio and direct radio voice research stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is that these people have actually gotten funding to further the research. David Fontana, Montague Keene, Arthur Ellison from the Society of Psychical Research over in Europe, they sat in for a long period of time with the skull experiment. They vetted so much of that stuff for fraud and any of that stuff, and so it's been through trial by fire more than once there. And at the end of the day, when you're looking at the extreme mentalities, with regard to the field, there's a quote from the late psychic Peter James, the guy who looks like Albert Einstein, if you've ever seen him.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, for the believer, no evidence is necessary. For the skeptic, no evidence will do. The debate rages on. I think that the truth is somewhere in the middle, and I take everything case by case. If I get evidence I believe is paranormal tonight, doesn't mean I've proved anything. It means that's what I believe. I believe these are. Next place I go, I get nothing. Does it mean it's haunted? Maybe. I didn't get anything. You go the next week, you get something.
Right. All right, let's see here. Question from Darren. He wants to know, what's the one experiment that you want to do that you haven't done yet?
Frankenstein. I want to put a human together with bolts in its neck, hook it up to a car battery. No. I can't even build radios. I can't say that. The one experiment that I want to do, honestly, the stuff that we're doing now is what I really want to do. What I'd like to see happen as we keep doing this, because I think it's a grind and it's a process. I'd like to continue to see what we're doing level up. Some of the communications that Marcello Bacci got, that Dr. Annabella Cardoso's got, what the Harsh Fishbacks couple in Luxembourg got with direct radio stuff. Mark Macy from Boulder, Colorado, he has phone recordings. Konstantin Radove called him. Why is that special? Konstantin Radove was dead. It came through on his phone. Anomalous messages on computers would show up in the earlier electronics times. A lot of the research and a lot of the history in the field suggests that a lot of mediums were even getting messages around the 1930s that told them that the electronics age was going to be, a whole other thing where that would be another means of communicating. And by the way, the people who are like Intuitive April, like Tina Marie Williamson, who works with Paul Dixon out of Pennsylvania, a friend of mine named Mariah Kunow, who studied under Lyde Ellerbach. She's in the San Francisco area. Those people, and I think even a friend of ours from Georgia, Philip Wyatt, who does ITC stuff, those people have the same level of responsibility that we do to do our experiments and our investigations with as much controls and as much validity as to vet our process before, during, and after. They have that same responsibility. And it's very hard for some people to understand the role and what these people who are mediums do. But I can tell you that the ones I've named, another friend of mine from California, Pamela Shahane Dinkowitz, who's a shaman, Pamela, Tina, April, what some of them have come out with is mind-blowing. And so in the book, Is There an Afterlife by David Fontana, he's got a whole series of chapters in the book where a lot of the psychics who, again, ghost hunting TV shows here don't really give you this profile, but a lot of the early psychic mediums went through trials by fire. They were vetted. They were put to the test, feet to the coals on so many different levels to prove. And still, at the end of the day, when people were hell-bent on not believing them, they didn't believe them. Mm-hmm. But a lot of them were not caught doing anything that was fraudulent. Some of them were. It's interesting. So and that's the problem, is that you have the rotten apples syndrome, right? You have, like, if one group breaks into some place to investigate and then it ruins it for everybody else, right? Mm-hmm. So some people who have peed in the community pool while they're swimming and have ruined it for other people, unfortunately. But so personal integrity is a lot to do with it too, because for a lot of us it's not a vocation. For some of the mediums it is, actually, and those people, just like the ones I named, they do quality work. They work with a bedside manner, mm-hmm. because when you're reading people, good news, bad news, or otherwise, you're interacting with another human being. So if you don't have some level of compassion and understanding with how to interact with people, then half of your gift is kind of wasted. I mean, you have to be able to connect with people in the same way you're able to connect with spirit. And so Tina Williamson, Intuitive April, Mariah Cuno, even Philip Wyatt, these people these are the people I've experienced working with. I'm sure there's many others out there who I don't know. They're mm-hmm. fantastic at doing that. They're great people, and they're very gifted at what they do.
Excuse me. All right, let's see here. So the next question is from Gerard. He wants to know, what do you think about scrying?
I don't have a lot of experience in scrying. I did one scrying experiment at the Shanley Hotel in Napanoch, New York. I don't know if you've ever heard or been to. 99.9% of people who have been to the Shanley love it. The original owner was a gentleman named Sal. It is now under the ownership of a woman named Kelly, who is awesome. And she has restored it. She is keeping it there for all of us. She's an amazing human being, an excellent investigator. I was part of a scrying thing there. I like to be honest when I'm not as well researched. I don't know a lot of the inner workings of it. They did a thing with a mirror and the red light, and I watched myself and my friend, who's an investigator who lives in New York City, named Dennis Tassone. Dennis, by the way, is a walking cartoon. He is so funny. A great investigator. And so we did it there, and I watched both of our faces transform into something else in the mirror. And mine actually looked like a younger version of my grandfather. I don't know. There's a lot of people who think that it's your mind is playing tricks on you kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Other people were in the room, could see the mirror when we were doing it. So I independently, one by one, showed them a picture of an older picture of my grandfather that I happened to have on my phone. Mm-hmm. And they all said, that's what your face looked like.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know enough about how that process works mm-hmm. to explain it, but scrying is fascinating. And so if anybody else listening besides Gerard who asked a question has an interest in that stuff, by all means, we need to dive into these things. We need to stay actively involved in new methodologies, keep the old ones going. There's this myth of progress that somehow today we're more advanced, we're better at this than the people or parents before us were. That is not necessarily the case, not in every instance. So when you work with people who've been doing this for a while, mm-hmm. really, like veteran paranormal investigators, people who've been around for a while. That up by Boston, Rhode Island, Joe Ranoni, Shane Pittman, who's on
Oh, yeah.
Holter Files, Flip Searles, I mentioned before, the Seminellis from New York. These are people that, Robert and Sandra Bandup, they have a group called Bearfort Paranormal in North Jersey. Ernie Atwell, who's also from, I believe he's in the South Jersey, Pennsylvania area. These are people who do this stuff. They've been doing it for a while. K.D. Foreman has a group out in Southern California I worked with when I lived out there. Tim Dalton, he's the tech guy for Tony Spera, who's got the Annabelle doll, Tony and Judy Spera.
Oh, uh-huh.
These people do, and Giuseppe even, who we were joking around with before. I can tell you about a catch that Giuseppe got here in Jersey. They do quality stuff, and that's an important part of doing the new stuff, doing the Giuseppe stories and SLS camera thing, but being able to still plug into the old methodologies or not losing sight of the foundation of what was there before us. That's what I love about the European direct radio stuff, is that these people did what I'm doing before I'm doing it. I'm doing it because they did it and because what they achieved with it and the trials they went to prove and fund what they're doing. So yeah, I love new methods. I love old methods. I love the tech stuff. Try it. If it doesn't work, keep trying it. Right. No piece of equipment works 100% of the time. That's
exactly.
In anything.
Let's see.
Darren's question.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so we have a running question. Darren asks this every show.
Awesome.
He wants to know, what is the one object in the world that you would not want to be haunted?
What object would I want not to be haunted?
Yeah, something that you don't want to be haunted.
My son's cat.
They're already kind of like possessed crazy anyways.
Yeah, he's a little cuckoo nuts. One object. I would say, I can't come up with a specific name of something off the top of my head, but I would say something that I would not be able to do without. Like hair gel, perhaps, or deodorant.
Oh, that's a good one. We have not had that yet.
Because then every time you keep putting it on your head, and then you're stylish yet possessed. It's not good.
That's true.
I don't even know what pants to wear with that. It's confusing. Have you figured out by that too? I'm a bit of a clown. Humor is positive energy. Laughing is positive energy. So even at investigations, having a good time, mentioned with Sean Austin, with Flip Searles, the Seminellis, having that sense of humor is so important. At the very least, especially if you do public events where you can't guarantee evidence, you can guarantee a good experience. And so that to me is always, you got to have fun. You got to know when to dial it down, focus, do your stuff right, but you got to be able to have fun.
Exactly. I agree 100%. Excuse me. All right, so then, opposite of that, he asks, what object would you want to be haunted?
My car. Because a lot of times when you leave an investigation, when you close all of the cases that your equipment goes in, the one thing left to close that you can't close are your eyes, and they want to.
Uh-huh.
Because usually it's very, very, very late.
Right.
Or very early, depending on how you're looking at it. So having a car that would, of course, it can't be negatively possessed, because then it's going to drive me somewhere else. Then I'm going to wake up somewhere in a parking lot in a neighborhood I don't want to be in, covered in feathers and who knows what else. So no, it's got to be positive.
Yeah, I said, when I was asked that on a show, I said that I don't want my car to be haunted, but just because I've gotten into way too many accidents, I don't need a car helping me in that situation.
Yeah, nah, I hear you. Yeah. How do you explain that to Geico?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, my car is possessed.
Yeah, there goes my 15%.
Yeah. Let's see. Matt has a question. Do you know anybody in the field using a crystal radio receiver for ITC?
I don't know anybody using a crystal radio receiver. In my own experience, I wanted to actually one of the things I was looking at picking up toys wise was one of the Rodave diodes to use in place of a standard microphone. Well, one of the things that makes that a little bit difficult, as far as a great question, is I don't know a lot of people who are doing European methodologies of ITC, or they actually call it TCI, Transcommunication Instrumental. I don't know a lot of people who are doing those methods. And so we started out with this big, everybody teases me, I'm like the LL Cool J of paranormal because I have this boom box. But I got it because I wanted something that could plug into the wall, but if you had somewhere where you didn't have electricity, you could run it on batteries. So I bought a Grundig, which is a very, very reputable German-made radio. And the boombox, it has all the bells and whistles, or what my friend Gary Greener calls the whiz-bang. It has all the whiz-bang features to it. It's got all the frequencies from long wave up to the upper bands of FM. And so that's a digital radio. And then what we stepped into, I think one of the pictures I sent you when I posted about the show tonight, I had the two little monitors, which are the ultra-high and very high frequency devices. And then the radio with that big wooden cabinet one, it's reminiscent of the one that Marcello Bacci used, or one of the radios he used in Grosseto, Italy. I think his was a Normandy, was the brand made. Mine is it's a brand called Saba. And so that's a vacuum tube radio. That one, I can't connect it to one of those portal devices. It's got a dipole antenna versus a monopole. Monopole is a standard stick that you have that comes out of the radio. Dipole antenna is when it'll split off into like a V, so it's got the wired dipole that's on the inside. It doesn't have a strong pull in long wave, which is kind of our comfort zone, but I have used it on medium wave a couple times. So the vacuum tube radio, the analog, is a little bit different than the digital. The crystal radios, I'm not sure if this radio would. I don't think it's. And that's the thing. Like I said, is I don't know a lot of people who are doing. Most of the people I know in paranormal community, even if they're using amazing pieces of equipment or the portal devices with the guitar pedals and the effects things that help clean up or manipulate the sound. And again, Steve Holte, Jay Prather, Katie Stafford, even Robert Bandoff from Barefoot, they make amazing stuff. But those are all primarily versions of sweeping radios, a lot of them. So I don't know of anybody who's using one that's crystal. If I had to guess from that group, I would say Steve Holte might be one of the people who does, because Holte's done a lot of different things. This is a guy I don't know him too well. I've been following his stuff for a while, but he's a brilliant guy, and he tries everything. He's the Mikey Likes It of tech guys. He makes it, he tries it, he'll play with it, he'll see if it works. And we need people like that in this field. The people who make stuff, we need them. The people who try different things and don't just, follow the flock and do what they see on TV. We need those people.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay, so Paul here is wanting to know what's the clearest device you've seen used to talk to spirits.
The clearest?
Mm-hmm.
That I've seen, I would say, it's going to bring me back to my paisan in Italy again. The stuff, well, the Harsh Fishback couple in Luxembourg got some amazing stuff. Mark Macy's got some amazing stuff. George Meek, amazing. A lot of the earlier ITC people, Annabelle Cardoso. But Bocci's one of the top of the heap guys. The stuff that came through the radio at some of his sittings was mind-blowing. I watched stuff that he'd done. I'd watch him they vetted his process, like I said, with the glass vacuum tubes. And so I would say for everything or everybody I've seen, whether I was present or it was on video or whatever, I would put him close to if not at the top of the list for just the most phenomenal, real-time, inexplicable, direct communication vocals.
Hopefully, Paul, that answered your question there.
Yeah, he's in that. He's featured in Calling Earth on Vimeo. He's featured in the Skull Experiment, which is the Afterlife Research Project. I forget what it's titled. It's on UFO TV. Has it on YouTube. Bocce's featured in both, and there's a documentary about Bocce that's translated into his English subtitles. That's also on YouTube. And he would also have people who came. A lot of them were parents who lost children. And they would also experience apports, too, which are when things pop or materialize into existence from nowhere. So people a woman whose son liked to surf, like she would have seashells or stuff under her chair at the end of the sitting. Now, clearly, unless she's got her entire head wrapped in tinfoil, if somebody walked up to her chair and put a shell under it, she would see him.
Mm-hmm.
So when these things pop into existence out of nowhere, and a lot of the people, and Paolo Presi, amongst a couple other people, investigated Bocce for years, and they witnessed rose petals falling out of nowhere, just the apports just popping in and out of existence. They don't know. It's an inexplicable thing. We don't know how it happens.
Mm-hmm.
There's some the history of the field, EVP and ITC stuff is fascinating. Two of the earlier examples, it was like 1952, there were two priests who were recording Gregorian chants on magnetic wire. And one of the fathers, Gemelli and Ernetti, and I think it was Gemelli's father, came through at the beginning of the recording when they played back the magnetic wire recording with the chants. He heard his father. He knew the voice. It said something that was relevant to him. So they bring this to Pope Pius, I think Pope Pius XII, because it's what, necromancy. It's supposed to be, sacrilege. You're not supposed to be talking to the dead. Pope Pius said he thought it was a monumental discovery. It could lead to the belief and proof of afterlife, of people continuing on to heaven. They also did not deem it sinful that it was necromancy, because they were not communicating with the dead by intent. The device is what facilitated it, not them. So, I mean, there's so much that happened before, somebody on a TV show walked out into a location. It doesn't mean I'm not one of the people. You'll never hear me. You'll never find anything on my social media that I'm not bashing any of the shows.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned Holter Files that Shane Pittman
Right.
is on. Phenomenal show. I'll still watch Ghost Adventures, Ghost Nation, Ghost Hunters,
Mm-hmm.
Ghost Loop with Sean Austin.
Right.
I love the TV shows. I get the entertainment of it. I know the practicality of it.
Right.
I've worked in television before too, so I understand what's involved. So I don't put it down. I don't think as a learning tool
Mm-hmm.
that it's bad. I just don't think it should stop there. Can you learn stuff from those shows? Absolutely. Should you stop learning after you shut off the TV? No, I think that there's all these books that somebody asked about, which is a great question. There's stuff online to learn. When the world opens back up, go to these public events. Work with Ray Savino's with RTL Paranormal in down by Virginia. Work with these people. You learn something from working with these people. They probably learn something from you. We're all part of the same community, and that's the thing that I think that's cannot get lost. I don't know that your evidence is real or not real. I can believe it or not believe it, but at the end of the day, I don't believe in speaking beyond what you can substantiate. So if I don't think what you do is legit, if I can't prove it, I shouldn't say it.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Gosh, there must be something in Kim's house. I just sneeze every time I go over here. Either that or her floor starts shaking or something weird happens.
Oh wow, shaking
Yeah,
floors.
it's weird.
I lived in LA for a long time. Shaking floors is not a comfortable thought.
Yeah, I bet not.
No, I've been through earthquakes. It's not fun.
Oh, I bet it's not.
You can tell who the transplant people are from other parts of the country because when an earthquake happens, they look scared. The people who are native to Los Angeles start doing math. They're like, what is that, a 4.2? What do you get outside with your calculator, you dumbass? The building is shaking. This is no time for trigonometry. Go.
Yeah. Oh, that's too funny. All right. So before we start to wrap things up, I think I've gotten through most of the questions there. But I know you were supposed to have an event coming up, but you have postponed it to September. Is that correct?
Yes. So I mentioned, John Ruggiero and Chris Theron. They're two of the prime members of New Jersey Paranormal. Their team is awesome. They do awesome events. They do an expo every year. I think this is the 7th annual one. I've attended every one but the first because the very first one happened, I think, right before I moved back from Los Angeles or right after, so I didn't even know about it. And so they were kind enough to bestow the opportunity to me to run an exhibit on ITC, including the historic aspects of it and some of the offshoot methodologies that I'm doing with ultra high frequency and heterodyning frequencies, and so that was supposed to be this month, I think it was May 16th, and then obviously with the condition of what's going on right now, it got pushed back to September 19th. I think we should be good by then.
Hope so.
Hopefully, it's able to happen. It's an expo. There are going to be gatherings of people. So I'm glad it's not before the summer. I think it was wise that they pushed it back. But at some point, even if it gets delayed again for whatever reason, that event will happen. Again, I was really honored to be asked to do it. I'm just doing something that piqued my interest. I developed a passion for. It started with I had an SB7. I watched the Ghost Adventures using it. I watched Chad Lindbergh use it. And then it's grown into something else. And so to be able to share what I'm trying to do, show it to people, it was a really, really very appreciated gesture that they asked me to do it. So, disappointed a little bit that it's postponed. Yeah. But the honor was in the invite.
Exactly.
From that point forward, then the onus was on me to deliver on what we talked about and what they want the exhibit to be, and then hopefully, this is something I'd like to be able to maybe take to schools and do it as a presentation and a little bit more of a show, not so much as a lecture. I have a background in performing. I did stand up. My background is I'm the less famous version of Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
I have a very similar path, except with all that. What do they call that baggage? Fame. I don't have the fame, but I did broadcasting in the fight industry for boxing and mixed martial arts for a long time. I did stand-up comedy for a long time. So I would like to take something like this and do it as some kind of an entertainment show, a stage show that I could take to schools and stuff to share what this stuff is and the awareness of what this stuff is, and make it palatable to somebody who wants to be entertained and who isn't geeking out on ghost stuff, but still find it fascinating, the historic side of it, the tech side of it, make it fun. So that's hopefully down the path along with the expo from here.
Okay, so where can people find you if they want to follow you or ask you any more questions or see when your events are?
Presently, I'm spending a lot of time under the couch.
No, I don't think you want a lot of people knocking on your door. They're going to start, Google Maps and look for you.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure if you Google Ron's couch, you're going to get a lot of options.
Yeah, probably.
So, I mean, I have my Facebook. So Lourdes and I have been apart. I'll try to make it short. I know I'm super chatty, but I'm excited to do this. I love doing this stuff. I love being able to talk to folks like you who've been doing this. The show is awesome. So thank you again for that. So Lourdes and I have been doing this research stuff for a little while. We've been part of a few different teams along the way. But we started when we made videos to kind of share some of the direct radio stuff that we've been able to capture. She came up with this name for an email address, which is called Gonyak, and her last name is Gonzalez, hence the Gon. Mine is Yacovetti, hence the Yak. Yacman sounds like somebody got evicted, so we didn't go with that. We went the other way with it. Ladies first, Gonyak. So we have a page on Facebook that we're starting to put stuff up on. It's called ITC The Invisible Art. That phrase is something that I think was, I know it's not made too familiar, but I think it was a phrase coined by Dr. Annabelle Cardoso. I just loved the reference to it because it is an art form. Direct radio communication is a method. There is an art to it, and you don't see it, so it is the invisible art. So we have a Facebook page called ITC The Invisible Art. I'm originally working on building out a website for myself. I haven't had one in a few years, but then since this stuff has kind of grown its own legs, the website that I started working on that I want to launch soon now is going to be a Gonyak thing. It's not going to just be a me thing. Another thing, let me just put out there real quick too, is that if you can do this with a friend, a family member, if you're in a relationship, if you can do this with the person you're with, it is a really, really cool thing. It's a bonding thing. When you spend time and money and resources on doing this kind of stuff, it's not something you go, well, you're wasting all your time and money on that. You're never home. What about buying this? It's a shared collective endeavor. You're both on the same page with it. So it's some people are just part of a team. That's awesome. But if you're just even part of a friendship or a partnership and it's just part of it, also really, really cool. So right now I would say, you think I forgot the original question, but I have had coffee. I remember. I am so in tune with the evening. I've been pacing back and forth for 30 minutes. I almost started a friction fire. Point is, we'll have a website soon. It will be probably Gonyak Paranormal or some derivative name of it. And the Facebook page that we have right now is ITC The Invisible Art.
Perfect. We'll be on the lookout for that information and that coming out. Give quick shout outs here to everybody who joined us in chat.
Yes, thank you to anybody who participated or listened.
Yes, we had a full house tonight. We had myself, we had Kim, we had Darren, we had Matt, we had April, we had Shay, we had Paul, we had Nick.
Oh, Shay. Shay's awesome
Shay
too.
was in there. We had Cynthia, we had Giuseppe, we had Lourdes, we had Gerard, we had Angie, we had Michael, we had Christopher, Nico, and Adam. So thank you, everybody who was in chat tonight. Thank you for everybody who was listening that is not in chat. We appreciate each and every one of you. We want to say thank you to our special guest.
Which we're going to have him back on. Cause
I know, you have so much information. So much.
We had some questions we couldn't even get to.
Well, I don't mean to brag, but I'm part of this larger organization called The World, and we're not going anywhere. So if you...
I know. I know, Shay's already like, I gotta bounce.
Yeah.
She's already out. But thank you for being on tonight. We'll definitely have to have you on again. We'll have to have you on closer to, your event, so that way you can go ahead and promote that as well.
That'd be great. I appreciate it. I really appreciate being on.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an honor to be asked, to be with you guys. Keep doing what you're doing. Always to have people who are passionate about this, putting it out there and doing what you do is important. Mm-hmm. You're out in the field too, so you know what it takes. You know what's involved.
Yep.
So keep, and even probably more meaningful now where people are looking for things to do and for stuff to watch and to have something that's pleasurable or a feel-good activity, something that they like to partake in. They can't go to locations and investigate now. So keep doing what you're doing, because I'm sure that you're in a lot of ways making moments in people's lives that they really can use right now.
Well, thank you. That goes for everybody that was in chat as well. We had a lot of awesome people in there tonight, and I know we have a lot of people that listen that don't get into chat, and so I try to thank them every night. Next week we do have an author on. He's a fictional author. He writes about the paranormal, and his name is Joshua Dumas. I think I said his last name correctly. So guys, check that one out. That's gonna be another awesome show, and thank you once again, Ron, for being on. And we will see you guys all next Thursday.
Thank you for listening to REP Paranormal and Friends. Be sure to check out Kim and Allison on Facebook at REP Paranormal Busters.